The rain came down in sheets, turning the dirt road into a river of mud. Sarah clutched her mother's worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, her boots squelching with each desperate step. 3 days since they'd buried Mama. 3 days since the landlord had thrown her out of the only home she'd ever known. Her stomach cramped with hunger, so fierce it made her dizzy. The trading post loomed ahead, its lamplit windows promising warmth she no longer believed she deserved. Sarah's fingers found the silver locket at her throat, the last thing of value she owned, with Mama's portrait inside. She'd sworn never to part with it, but promises meant nothing to an empty belly. Before we continue with Sarah's journey, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It truly means everything to us and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening from today? Please, let me know in the comments. The bell above the door jangled as Sarah pushed inside. The proprietor, a thin man with calculating eyes, barely glanced up from his ledger. She approached the counter, hands shaking as she unclasped the locket. "I need food," she said, hating how her voice broke. "Please, this is real silver." "Ain't worth much." He squinted at it. "Give you half a loaf of bread, maybe some jerky." Sarah's vision blurred. Half a loaf for Mama's face, for the only piece of her father she had left. "That's robbery, Hutchins." The voice came from the shadows near the stove, deep, rough as gravel, with an edge that made the proprietor straighten. A man unfolded himself from a chair, and Sarah's breath caught. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. But it was his eyes that held her, storm gray and intense, fixed on her with an attention that made her skin prickle. "This don't concern you, Callahan," Hutchins muttered. "It does now." The man, Callahan, crossed the space between them in 3 long strides. He was close enough now that Sarah could see the scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands, the way his shirt stretched across his chest. "The lady needs supplies. I'll cover it." "I don't want charity," Sarah said quickly, though her pride felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Callahan's gaze shifted to her, and something in those gray eyes softened. "Not charity. A job offer." He gestured to her locket. "Keep that. Silver isn't what I need. Can you cook?" Sarah blinked. Yes. My mother taught me." "Then I've got work for you. My ranch hands are tired of my burnt steak and coffee thick as tar. You cook, you earn your keep. Fair trade." It was too generous, too convenient. Sarah had learned long ago that men didn't offer things without expecting payment of another kind. She took a step back, clutching the locket to her chest. Callahan seemed to read her thoughts. His jaw tightened, and he raised both hands, palms out. "Just cooking, miss. I've got a bunkhouse you can have to yourself. Lock on the door. You'll be safe there. I give you my word." "Your word?" Sarah laughed, a bitter sound. "I don't even know you." "Name's Jackson Callahan. I run the Triple C Ranch, 5 miles west. I've got 10 ranch hands who'll vouch for my character, and a housekeeper named Rosa who'd box my ears if I acted ungentlemanly." He paused. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she hesitated. "Sarah Mitchell." "Well, Sarah Mitchell, you've got a choice. Take Hutchins's insulting offer, or come with me. Either way, you're keeping that locket." Something in his tone, firm but not commanding, offering a choice rather than demanding compliance, made her throat tight. She looked at the locket, then at Jackson Callahan's weathered face. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was strength in the set of his jaw, honesty in his steady gaze. Just cooking, she repeated. Just cooking, he confirmed. Sarah nodded once, quick before she could lose her nerve. All right. Jackson turned to Hutchins. Pack up supplies. Flour, coffee, sugar, beans, bacon. Add it to my account. When the proprietor moved to protest, Jackson leaned across the counter. And treat my new cook with respect, or you'll find the Triple C taking our business to Thornton. 20 minutes later, Sarah sat beside Jackson on his wagon, supplies rattling in the bed behind them. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the setting sun broke through the clouds, painting everything gold and rose. She was acutely aware of his presence, the way his forearms flexed as he handled the reins, the faint scent of leather and sage that clung to him. Thank you, she said quietly, for what you did back there. You don't need to thank me. A woman shouldn't have to trade her mother's memory for a meal. Sarah looked at him sharply. How did you know? The way you held it, like letting go would break something inside you. Jackson kept his eyes on the road. I understand that kind of loss. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking beneath them. Sarah studied the landscape, rolling hills dotted with sage, mountains purple in the distance. It was beautiful, in a harsh, unforgiving way. Like Jackson himself, she thought, then immediately chastised herself for the observation. My wife died 2 years ago, Jackson said suddenly. Fever took her in 3 days. I couldn't. He stopped, his knuckles white on the reins. I couldn't save her. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered. So was I, for a long time. He glanced at her then, something raw and honest in his expression. Still am, most days. But life keeps moving, whether we're ready or not. We either move with it or get trampled. Sarah recognized the truth of it. She'd watched her mother waste away for months, cancer eating her from the inside out. She'd held Mama's hand until the very end, and then she'd been cast out like garbage. Moving forward was all she had left. The Triple C Ranch appeared as they crested a hill, a sprawling house with a wraparound porch, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. It was more impressive than Sarah had expected, speaking of hard work and prosperity. Ranch hands looked up from their evening chores as the wagon rolled in, their curious gazes following her. Rosa! Jackson called as he helped Sarah down from the wagon. His hands at her waist were brief, impersonal, but she felt the warmth of them through her dress. An older Mexican woman appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her dark eyes swept over Sarah with maternal assessment. ¿Quién es ella? Our new cook, Sarah Mitchell. Jackson switched smoothly to Spanish, explaining the situation. Sarah caught enough to understand he was asking Rosa to help her get settled, to make sure she felt safe. Rosa's expression softened. She descended the porch and took Sarah's hands. Come, mija. Let's get you fed and into some dry clothes. You look half-starved. That night, Sarah lay in a narrow bed in the small bunkhouse Jackson had promised. It was clean, sparse, but warm. The lock on the door was solid. Through the window, she could see the main house. Lamplight glowing in what Rosa had told her was Jackson's study. She thought about the way he'd looked at her locket, the way he'd understood without her having to explain, the way his hands had steadied her as she climbed down from the wagon, strong, careful, asking nothing. Sarah pressed her palm against her chest, feeling her heartbeat slow for the first time in days. Maybe, just maybe, she'd found somewhere she could breathe again. Dawn came early on a ranch. Sarah woke to the sound of horses whinnying and men's voices calling to each other. She dressed quickly in one of the simple dresses Rosa had loaned her and made her way to the main house. The kitchen was large, well-equipped, with a massive cast-iron stove and windows overlooking the eastern range. Rosa was already there, mixing dough for biscuits. "Buenos dias," the older woman greeted her warmly. "Ready to show these vaqueros what real cooking tastes like?" Sarah rolled up her sleeves. "What do they usually eat?" "Whatever Jackson burns, or whatever I have time to make between all my other work." Rosa chuckled. "The man can face down a charging bull, but he's defeated by a frying pan." They worked side by side, falling into an easy rhythm. Sarah's hands remembered what her mother had taught her: how to test the heat of the skillet, when to flip the bacon, how to make the coffee strong but not bitter. When the ranch hands filed in for breakfast, their surprise was almost comical. "Is that actual gravy?" one of them asked, staring at his plate. "And biscuits that ain't hard as rocks," another added. Jackson was the last to arrive, his hair still damp from washing. He filled the doorway, and Sarah found herself very focused on the scrambled eggs she was plating. He sat at the head of the long table and took his first bite. The silence that followed made Sarah nervous. Then Jackson closed his eyes. "Lord have mercy," he murmured. "This is real food." The table erupted in agreement, and Sarah felt heat climb her cheeks. She wasn't used to praise, to being seen as anything other than a burden. After breakfast, as the men dispersed to their work, Jackson lingered. "That was exceptional, Sarah. Thank you." "It's what you hired me for," she said, busying herself with dishes. Still, he picked up a towel and started drying plates beside her. "You don't have to eat alone in the bunkhouse, you know. Rosa and I eat together most evenings. You're welcome to join us." Sarah scrubbed at a pan. "That wouldn't be proper." "Proper?" Jackson's voice carried a hint of amusement. "Miss Mitchell, you're living on a cattle ranch. We gave up on proper about the time we started birthing calves in the parlor." Despite herself, Sarah smiled. "That happens?" "Last March. Blizzard came through. We lost the barn roof." He grinned, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, less careworn. "Had 16 head of cattle camped in the house for 3 days. Amelia would have had my hide if she'd been alive to see it." "Your wife?" "Yeah." The grief was still there, but softer now, like an old scar. She loved this place, loved the chaos of it. Sarah rinsed the pan, feeling the warm water soothe her chapped hands. What was she like? Jackson was quiet for a moment. Strong, stubborn. She'd challenge me on everything, never back down. He smiled at the memory. "She used to say I needed someone to keep me honest." "Sounds like she knew you well." "Better than anyone." He set down the towel. "That's why I know she'd approve of you being here. Amelia hated seeing folks in need. She'd have brought you home herself." The words were kind, but they also drew a clear line. Sarah was here because Jackson's dead wife would have approved, not because he wanted her here. She told herself the sting she felt was ridiculous, that she had no right to want anything more. "I should get started on lunch," she said, turning away before he could see her expression. If Jackson noticed her withdrawal, he didn't comment. "I'll be out on the South Range if you need anything. Rosa knows how to reach me." The days fell into a pattern. Sarah cooked 3 meals a day, and the ranch hands began to worship her. She learned their names: Charlie, the youngest, barely 19, Diego, Rosa's nephew, Tom, the grizzled foreman who'd been with Jackson since before Amelia died. They treated her with respect, keeping their distance, but always ready with a kind word or a tip of the hat. Jackson was harder to read. He was polite, appreciative, but maintained a careful distance. He didn't linger after meals anymore, didn't seek her out for conversation. Sarah told herself it was better this way, safer. But at night, lying in her narrow bed, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The way his shirt pulled across his shoulders when he lifted hay bales. The rare smile that made his gray eyes warm like stones in sunlight. The gentleness in his rough hands when he'd steadied a spooked horse. She had no business thinking such things. She was the widow's daughter, used goods in the eyes of society. And he was still in love with a ghost. 2 weeks after her arrival, a spring storm rolled in with violent speed. Sarah was hanging laundry when the sky turned black and the wind began to howl. She grabbed the basket and ran for the house, but the rain came down like a curtain, soaking her in seconds. Lightning split the sky, and thunder followed so close it shook her bones. Sarah's foot caught on something, a root, a stone, and she went down hard, her ankle twisting beneath her. Pain shot up her leg, sharp and immediate. Sarah, through the rain, she saw Jackson running toward her. He was soaked too, his shirt plastered to his body. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Are you hurt?" "My ankle," she gasped. Jackson didn't hesitate. He scooped her up like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. "Hold on to me." Sarah wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady rhythm of his heart against her cheek. He carried her, not to the bunkhouse, but to the main house, shouldering through the door and into the parlor. "Rosa," he called, setting Sarah gently on the sofa. "Get some bandages and ice if we have it." "Jackson, I'm fine," Sarah protested. But when she tried to move her ankle, she couldn't suppress a gasp. "You're not fine." His voice was rough with something that might have been fear. He knelt before her, his hands hovering over her injured foot. "I need to take your boot off. It's going to hurt." Sarah nodded, bracing herself. Jackson's fingers were careful, unbuttoning the boot with painstaking slowness. Even so, she hissed when he eased it off her swollen ankle. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I'm sorry. It's not your fault." Sarah looked down at his bent head, at the way his wet hair curled against his collar. She had the strangest urge to touch it, to see if it was as soft as it looked. Rosa appeared with supplies, tisking over Sarah's injury. Between the two of them, they wrapped her ankle and elevated it on pillows. Jackson disappeared and returned with a glass of whiskey. "For the pain," he explained, pressing it into her hand. Sarah took a sip and coughed at the burn. Jackson's lips twitched. "Not much of a drinker? Mama said whiskey was the devil's medicine." "Your mama was probably right about most things." Jackson settled into a chair across from her. "But sometimes the devil's medicine is exactly what we need." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the storm rage outside. Rosa brought tea and disappeared again, leaving them alone. Sarah found herself studying Jackson's profile. The strong line of his jaw, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken once, the way his brow furrowed when he was thinking. "You're staring," he said, without looking at her. Sarah's cheeks heated. "I'm sorry. I was just, you've been very kind to me. I don't know how to repay you." Now he did look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "You don't owe me anything, Sarah. You work hard. You've made this place feel like a home again. That's more than enough." "But you're not just anything." Jackson leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I see you, Sarah Mitchell. I see how you care for the men, how you've befriended Rosa, how you put your whole heart into everything you do. You're not property. You're not a burden. You're a person worth—" He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "You're valuable." Sarah's throat tightened. No one had spoken to her like that before. Not even Mama, who'd loved her but had been too worn down by life to offer much more than basic affection. "I shouldn't." She stopped, not sure what she was trying to say. "Shouldn't what?" "Feel." Sarah gestured helplessly at the space between them. "This, whatever this is, it's not appropriate. You're my employer, and you're still in love with my dead wife?" Jackson's voice was gentle, not accusatory. "I'll always love Amelia, but she's gone, Sarah. I've spent 2 years living in the past, and I'm tired." He ran a hand through his wet hair, making it stand up in endearing spikes. "And then you showed up, rain-soaked and desperate, trying to trade your mother's locket for a loaf of bread, and something in me shifted." Sarah's heart was hammering. "Shifted how?" "I started remembering what it felt like to want to come home at the end of the day, to look forward to something besides work and sleep and more work." He met her eyes. "To feel alive again." "Jackson, I'm not asking you for anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know you're not alone in feeling whatever this is." The storm outside matched the tumult in Sarah's chest. She wanted to reach for him, to close the distance between them. But fear held her back. Fear of being hurt, of not being enough, of losing something precious before she'd even had a chance to hold it. "I should rest," she said instead, the coward's way out. Jackson nodded, standing. "Of course. I'll carry you to the bunkhouse when the storm—" "No." Sarah surprised herself. Would it be all right if I stayed here tonight? Just until the storm passes?" Something flared in Jackson's eyes. Hope, maybe, or relief. "The guest room upstairs. I'll get it ready." He carried her up the stairs, his arms steady beneath her. The guest room was lovely, with a large bed and curtains that matched the wallpaper. Jackson set her on the bed, with the same care he'd shown before. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. Jackson paused at the door. "Sarah, what you said earlier, about not wanting to feel this, I understand that, but for what it's worth—" He looked back at her, and the vulnerability in his face made her ache. "I'm glad you're here, even if it's complicated, even if it scares me. I'm glad." Then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone with her racing heart and the sound of rain on the roof. The next morning, Sarah's ankle was better, but still tender. Jackson insisted she stay off it for a few days, which meant Rosa took over the cooking, while Sarah supervised from a chair in the kitchen. It chafed, being unable to work properly, but it also gave her time to observe the rhythms of the ranch more closely. She noticed how Jackson checked in with each of his men personally, asking about their families, their concerns, how he was first up every morning and last to bed every night, how he carried the weight of responsibility for 12 people and hundreds of cattle without complaint. She also noticed how he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, with a hunger that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with loneliness. On the third day, Charlie burst into the kitchen, hat in hand, face pale. "Boss, we got trouble. Riders approaching from the east, armed." Jackson was on his feet immediately. "How many?" "6, maybe 7. Get the men together. Sarah, Rosa, stay inside." Jackson was already moving toward the door, buckling on his gun belt. "Who are they?" Sarah called after him. Jackson's jaw was tight. "Probably Hendrix's men. We've been having a dispute over water rights. Guess he's decided to settle it his way. Fear spiked through Sarah. She'd heard about range wars, about how quickly they could turn deadly. "Be careful." Jackson paused, looking back at her. "Always am." But the concern in his eyes suggested he knew careful might not be enough. Sarah hobbled to the window, Rosa beside her. They watched as Jackson and his men formed a line in front of the house. The approaching riders emerged from the dust, 7 men on horseback, led by a barrel-chested man with a thick beard. Callahan, the man, Hendricks, presumably, bellowed, "We need to talk about that creek running through your north pasture." "It's on my land, Hendricks. We've been through this with the land office. That creek feeds into my land. My cattle need water, same as yours. Then dig a well like everyone else." Jackson's voice was calm but firm. "You're not touching my water supply." Hendricks's face reddened. "You can't hog all the resources in this valley, Callahan. There are other ranches here, other people trying to make a living. And you're welcome to make that living on your own land, with your own resources." The tension was thick enough to cut. Sarah's hands clenched on the windowsill. She could see the way Hendricks's men had their hands near their weapons, the way Jackson's foreman Tom had shifted his stance, ready to draw. "This ain't over," Hendricks snarled. "One way or another, I'm getting access to that water. Then do it legally. But if you come onto my land again making threats, I'll defend what's mine." For a long moment, the two groups stared at each other. Then Hendricks spat in the dirt and wheeled his horse around. "You're making a mistake, Callahan. Wouldn't be my first." The riders thundered away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Jackson stood watching until they disappeared over the horizon, then turned back to the house. Sarah saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands stayed near his gun, even as his men dispersed. When he came inside, Rosa immediately pressed a cup of coffee into his hands. "That man is trouble, Jackson. You know he won't let this go." "I know." Jackson drank the coffee in one long swallow. "But I'm not giving him an inch. That water is what makes this ranch viable. Without it, we'd dry up in a month." Sarah had been quiet, but now she spoke. "What will you do?" Jackson looked at her, and she saw the weight of leadership in his eyes. "Post guards at the creek. Ride the fence lines. Wait." He set down his cup with more force than necessary. "And hope Hendricks isn't stupid enough to start a shooting war." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Every sound made her jump. The creak of the house settling, the call of a night bird, the distant lowing of cattle. She kept thinking about Jackson out there somewhere, checking the perimeter, putting himself between his people and danger. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Her ankle was nearly healed now, just a slight tenderness when she put weight on it. She made her way quietly downstairs and out onto the porch. Jackson was there, sitting on the steps, rifle across his knees. He looked up when she approached, and something in his expression softened. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. Sarah shook her head, settling beside him. "I keep thinking about what happened today. What could have happened. Range wars are ugly business. I've seen good men die over less." Jackson's voice was grave. "But I won't be bullied off my land. My father built this ranch from nothing. Amelia and I poured our lives into it. I'll defend it, even if it means dying for it. Even then." He looked at her. "That probably sounds foolish to you." "No," Sarah said softly. "It sounds like you're a man who knows what matters." She hesitated, then added, "But I don't want you to die, Jackson. I care about what happens to you." The words hung between them, more revealing than she'd intended. Jackson set his rifle carefully against the porch rail and turned to face her fully. "Sarah," he began, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something. All right? When you first came here, I told myself it was just Christian charity, helping someone in need, but that was a lie." He reached out, his fingers hovering near her face, but not quite touching. "Every day, I find myself looking for you, listening for your voice, making excuses to be near you, and it terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I failed Amelia. When she got sick, I couldn't save her. I had all this strength, all this land, all this money, and none of it mattered. She died anyway, and I was useless." His hand fell. "What if I fail you too? What if something happens and I can't—" Sarah caught his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Jackson, you're not God. You can't control everything. Amelia's death wasn't your failure. It was just the cruelty of fate. But if I let myself care for you, if I let you matter to me, and then I lose you, then you'll grieve, like any person would. But you'll also have had something beautiful while it lasted." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Isn't that better than spending the rest of your life afraid to feel anything?" Jackson stared at their joined hands, then slowly raised his gaze to her face. "You're brave, Sarah Mitchell. Braver than me." "I'm not brave. I'm terrified." She laughed shakily. "But I'm more afraid of walking away from this, from you, without ever knowing what it could be." "What do you want it to be?" Sarah's heart was in her throat. I want to matter to someone, not as a cook or a burden or something to be managed. I want to be seen, really seen for who I am." She met his eyes. "And I want that someone to be you." Jackson's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "You do matter, Sarah, more than you know." "Then why do you keep pulling away from me?" "Because every time I get close to you, I want to get closer. And I'm afraid of what that means." "What does it mean?" Instead of answering, Jackson lifted his free hand to her face, his calloused palm cupping her cheek with infinite gentleness. "It means I think about you first thing in the morning and last thing at night. It means I imagine what it would be like to kiss you, to hold you, to wake up beside you." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It means I'm falling in love with you, and I don't know how to stop." Sarah's breath caught. "Then don't stop." "Sarah, I'm falling too, Jackson, and I'm tired of being afraid." For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other. Then Jackson leaned in, and Sarah met him halfway. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than a demand. Jackson's lips were warm against hers, tasting faintly of coffee and something uniquely him. Sarah's eyes fluttered closed as she leaned into it, into him, one hand coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, racing as fast as her own. Jackson pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against hers. "Tell me to stop if this is too fast." "Don't you dare stop," Sarah breathed. This time when he kissed her, it was deeper, more certain. His arm came around her waist, drawing her closer, and Sarah wound her arms around his neck. She'd never been kissed like this before, like she was precious, like she was wanted, like she was enough. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his cheek against her hair. "I shouldn't want this," he murmured, echoing her thoughts from moments before. "But I do, God help me, I do." "I shouldn't want this," Sarah whispered back, her voice trembling. "But I don't want to stop." Jackson pulled back to look at her, and the tenderness in his eyes made her chest ache. "Then we won't stop. Not unless you want to." "I don't want to," Sarah said firmly. "Not now. Not tomorrow. Not. Jackson kissed her again, swallowing the rest of her words. And for the first time since her mother died, Sarah felt like she'd found her way home. The next few weeks passed in a haze of discovery. Jackson courted Sarah properly, or as properly as ranch life allowed. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow. He taught her to ride, his hands steadying her in the saddle, his patience endless when she struggled. He talked to her about the ranch, about his dreams for its future, about the weight of responsibility and the joy of watching something grow. And in the quiet moments, when the work was done and the ranch settled for the night, they found each other on the porch or in the barn or by the creek. They kissed until Sarah's lips were swollen, until she trembled in his arms and he groaned her name like a prayer. But Jackson was always careful, always respectful. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, even when she could see the desire burning in his eyes. "Why do you stop?" she asked one night, when they'd been kissing on the porch and he'd pulled away, his breathing ragged. "Because I respect you," Jackson said simply. "Because when we go further, and we will, Sarah, make no mistake, I want it to be right. I want you to be my wife first." Sarah's heart stuttered. "Your wife? If you'll have me." Jackson took her hands. "I know it's fast. I know there are people who'll talk, who'll say I'm disrespecting Amelia's memory. But I don't care. I want you, Sarah. I want to build a life with you. I want to fall asleep beside you and wake up to your face every morning for the rest of my days." "Jackson?" Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Yes, I'll marry you." The smile that broke across Jackson's face was like sunrise. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. When he did, he kissed her thoroughly, possessively, branding her as his. "Soon," he promised against her lips. "We'll make it official soon." But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 2 days later, Sarah was in the garden with Rosa, when Charlie came running. "Fire!" he shouted. "Fire on the South Range!" Jackson and the men rode out immediately, leaving Sarah and Rosa to watch the smoke billow into the sky. It took all day to contain the blaze, and when the men finally returned, they were filthy, exhausted, and grim. "Arson," Jackson said flatly, collapsing onto the porch steps. "Someone said it deliberately." "Found traces of kerosene in 3 different spots." "Hendricks?" Tom asked. "Who else?" Jackson's jaw was tight. "He's escalating." Sarah brought water and food, her hands shaking with barely suppressed fear. She'd seen the look in Jackson's eyes, the look of a man preparing for war. That night, Jackson doubled the guards. He barely slept, spending most of the dark hours riding the perimeter with his rifle. Sarah watched from her window in the main house. Jackson had insisted she move into the guest room permanently, and prayed nothing would happen. Her prayers went unanswered. The attack came 3 nights later, in the darkest hours before dawn. Sarah woke to the sound of gunfire and men shouting. She threw on a robe and ran downstairs, her heart pounding. "Get down!" Rosa grabbed her, pulling her behind the kitchen table. "Stay here!" Through the window, Sarah could see muzzle flashes in the darkness. The raiders, it had to be Hendricks's men, had come in force, shooting at anything that moved. Jackson's men were returning fire, but they were outnumbered. Sarah saw Jackson running toward the house, and her blood turned to ice. One of the raiders on horseback was bearing down on him, rifle raised. She didn't think. She grabbed the shotgun Jackson kept by the kitchen door and ran outside. "Sarah, no!" Rosa screamed. Sarah raised the shotgun, braced it against her shoulder the way Jackson had taught her, and fired. The recoil knocked her back a step, but her aim was true. The raider's horse reared, throwing its rider, the shot going wild into the air. Jackson spun around, his eyes wide with shock and something that might have been fury. But there was no time for recriminations. He ran to her, grabbed her arm, and hauled her back into the house. "What the hell were you thinking?" he roared, slamming the door behind them. "I was thinking he was going to kill you," Sarah shouted back, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the shotgun. Jackson grabbed her shoulders. "You could have been killed. Do you understand that? You—" His voice broke. "Sarah, if something happened to you—" "And if something happened to you?" Sarah demanded, tears streaming down her face. "What then, Jackson? What happens to me?" Jackson pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'm sorry. God, I'm sorry. But you can't do that again. You can't put yourself in danger for me." "Then don't put yourself in danger for me," Sarah said into his chest. "Because I'll do it again, Jackson. I'll do it every time." The gunfire outside was tapering off. Through the window, they could see Hendrick's men retreating, several of them wounded or unhorsed. Jackson's men gave chase for a short distance, then regrouped. Tom appeared at the door, breathing hard. "They're gone, boss. Couple of our boys are hurt, but nothing serious. We got 2 of theirs. They'll be answering to the sheriff." Jackson nodded, not loosening his hold on Sarah. "Good. Tom, take whoever's not injured and ride into town. Get the sheriff out here. It's time this ended." The sheriff arrived by noon, a stern-faced man named Garrett, who'd been keeping peace in the territory for 20 years. He took statements, examined the evidence, and arrested the 2 captured raiders. Within a week, Hendricks himself was in jail, facing charges of arson, attempted murder, and a host of other crimes. The threat was over. The ranch was safe. But something had shifted between Sarah and Jackson. The violence, the near loss, had stripped away the last of their reservations. They moved around each other with a new awareness, a new urgency. "Marry me," Jackson said one evening, taking her hands as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Not soon. Now. Tomorrow. I don't want to wait anymore, Sarah. Life's too short, and I've wasted enough time being afraid." Sarah nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Yes, tomorrow. They were married the next day in the ranch's parlor, with Rosa and Tom as witnesses and the local preacher officiating. Sarah wore a simple white dress that Rosa had magically produced, and Jackson wore his Sunday suit, his hair slicked back, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Jackson cupped Sarah's face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her toes curl. "Mrs. Callahan," he murmured against her lips. "Mr. Callahan," she replied, smiling through happy tears. That night, Jackson carried Sarah over the threshold of the master bedroom, his bedroom, now theirs. He set her down gently, his hands trembling slightly. "I've never," Sarah began, then stopped, embarrassed. Jackson's eyes softened. "I know, and I'll be gentle, I promise. We'll go as slow as you need." He was patient, worshipful, taking his time to learn what made her sigh, what made her gasp. He kissed every inch of her skin he uncovered, murmuring words of love and praise. And when he finally made her his wife in truth, Sarah clung to him, overwhelmed by the intimacy, by the rightness of it. "I love you," Jackson whispered, as they lay tangled together afterward, his hand stroking her hair. "God, Sarah, I love you so much." "I love you too," Sarah replied, pressing her face into his neck. I didn't think I could feel this way again. After Mama died, I thought I was broken, but you made me whole. You were never broken, sweetheart, just hurt. But we're together now. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know how precious you are. In the months that followed, Sarah bloomed like the wildflowers that dotted the ranch. She expanded her role beyond cooking, working alongside Rosa to manage the household, learning the business side of ranching from Jackson. The ranch hands treated her with the respect due to the boss's wife, but also with genuine affection earned through her kindness and hard work. Jackson was everything Sarah had never known she needed: a partner who valued her opinion, a lover who made her feel cherished, a friend who made her laugh, even on the hardest days. He taught her to shoot properly, to ride like she was born to it, to read the sky for coming weather. And Sarah taught Jackson how to live again, how to find joy in small moments, how to let go of guilt and embrace the future. 6 months after their wedding, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She told Jackson one evening as they sat on their porch, their special place, watching the sun set over the land they'd defended together. Jackson's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He whooped with joy, picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down with exaggerated care. "Sorry, is that okay? Can I do that? Should you be sitting down?" Sarah laughed. "Jackson, I'm pregnant, not made of glass." But still, he knelt before her, placing his hands gently on her still flat belly. "There's a baby in there. Our baby." "Our baby," Sarah confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. Jackson looked up at her, and Sarah saw tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me a future." "We gave it to each other," Sarah corrected gently. She cupped his face in her hands. "Together, remember?" "Together," Jackson agreed. He stood and pulled her into his arms, and they stood there as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. Two people who'd found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful in the light. Epilogue. 3 years later, Sarah stood in the same spot on the porch, watching her husband teach their son to ride. Little James, named for Jackson's father, was only 2, but he already had his father's stubborn determination and his mother's bright curiosity. "Gentle, Jamie," Jackson instructed, his large hand covering his son's small one on the reins. "The horse is your partner, not a tool." Sarah's hand rested on her swollen belly, where their second child grew. A daughter this time, they hoped. Someone to balance out Jamie's wild energy with a little sense. Though knowing Jackson, the girl would probably be just as much trouble as her brother. Rosa appeared beside her, a knowing smile on her face. "Happy, Mia?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, desperate, starving, ready to trade her mother's locket for survival. She thought about Jackson, wounded and wary, hiding from life in his grief. And she thought about how they'd found each other in their darkest moments and built this, a family, a home, a love that grew stronger with each passing day. "Yes," she finally managed, "I'm happy." Jackson looked up then, as if sensing her gaze. He smiled at her, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart flutter, and mouthed the word, "Love you." Sarah pressed her hand to her lips and blew him a kiss. Jamie saw and immediately copied her, making Jackson laugh. The Triple C Ranch had weathered storms and threats, drought and hardship, but it had also witnessed rebirth, new beginnings, the stubborn persistence of hope. Sarah had learned that the West was harsh and unforgiving, but it was also honest. It showed you what you were made of, stripped away pretense, and left only truth. And the truth was this: Sarah Mitchell, now Sarah Callahan, had found exactly where she belonged. The morning Sarah went into labor with their daughter, a late spring storm was brewing on the horizon. Jackson had been out checking the fence lines when Tom came galloping up, his face pale. "Boss, Rosa says it's time. The baby's coming." Jackson didn't wait to hear more. He spurred his horse into a full gallop, his heart hammering harder than the hoofbeats beneath him. Sarah had been having pains since dawn, but she'd insisted they were just practice contractions, the kind Rosa had told her to expect. But Rosa knew better, and Rosa never panicked without cause. He burst through the front door to find Sarah gripping the kitchen table, her face contorted in pain. Rosa was beside her, murmuring soothing words in Spanish. "Jackson," Sarah gasped, reaching for him. He was at her side in an instant, letting her grip his hand with crushing force. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." "It's too soon," Sarah panted as the contraction eased. "The baby isn't due for another 3 weeks." "Babies come when they're ready," Rosa said calmly. "Come, let's get you upstairs." Between contractions, Jackson carried Sarah to their bedroom. He'd faced down armed raiders, survived blizzards and droughts, wrestled steers twice his size. But nothing had ever terrified him like watching Sarah in pain. "Don't leave me," Sarah pleaded, gripping his hand as another contraction seized her. "Never," Jackson promised. "I'm not going anywhere." Rosa shooed him out only once, to boil water and gather supplies. Jackson paced the hallway like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair until it stood on end. He could hear Sarah's cries through the door, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. Tom appeared at the top of the stairs, with Jamie in his arms. The little boy's eyes were wide with confusion. "Mama?" Jackson took his son, holding him close. "Mama's bringing us a baby, buddy. She's working very hard." "Mama hurt?" "A little, but she's strong, remember? Strongest person we know." Jamie nodded solemnly, then pressed his face into Jackson's neck. Jackson held him, drawing comfort from the solid weight of his son, praying desperately that Sarah and the baby would both be all right. Hours passed. The storm broke overhead, rain lashing the windows, thunder shaking the house. Jackson had given Jamie to one of the ranch hands and returned to his post outside the bedroom door. He could hear Rosa's encouraging voice, Sarah's exhausted sobs, and his own heart beating so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. Then, in a moment of relative quiet between thunderclaps, he heard it. A thin, wavering cry. Jackson's knees went weak. He gripped the doorframe to keep himself upright. "Jackson," Rosa called. "Come meet your daughter." He stumbled into the room. Sarah lay propped against pillows, her hair soaked with sweat, her face pale with exhaustion. But she was smiling and holding a tiny, red-faced bundle wrapped in a clean blanket. "A girl," Sarah whispered, her eyes shining with tears. "We have a daughter, Jackson." Jackson dropped to his knees beside the bed, unable to trust his legs. He reached out with a trembling hand to touch the baby's impossibly small head, feeling the soft down of dark hair beneath his calloused fingers. "She's perfect," he breathed. "Sarah, she's perfect." "Would you like to hold her?" Jackson had held Jamie from the moment he was born, but somehow this felt different. Perhaps because he'd been so afraid of losing Sarah, of history repeating itself. But Sarah was alive, tired but alive, and their daughter was here, healthy and squalling with impressive lung power. He took the baby carefully, cradling her against his chest. She was so small, so fragile. Her eyes, dark blue like all newborns, blinked up at him, and Jackson felt his heart crack open and reform around this new person. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your papa, and I promise you, I'm going to spend every day of my life making sure you know how loved you are." "What should we name her?" Sarah asked softly. They'd discussed names, but had never quite settled on one. Jackson looked down at his daughter, then at his wife. "What about Amelia? After my first wife, and Grace for your mother." Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Amelia Grace Callahan. It's beautiful." "You're sure? I don't want you to feel—" "Jackson, I never met Amelia, but I know she was important to you. She helped make you the man I fell in love with." Sarah reached out to touch his face. "And Mama would be so proud to have her namesake." Jackson leaned over carefully, mindful of the baby in his arms, and kissed his wife. "Thank you for everything, for this family, for giving me a reason to live again." "We gave that to each other," Sarah reminded him, echoing words she'd spoken years ago. "Together." "Together," Jackson agreed. That night, after Rosa had checked on Sarah one final time and retreated to her own quarters, Jackson sat in the rocking chair beside the bed with Amelia in his arms. Sarah was sleeping, exhausted from the ordeal. Jamie was in his own room, sprawled across his small bed with the abandon of childhood. Jackson rocked gently, watching the rise and fall of his daughter's tiny chest. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and clean. Through the window, he could see stars emerging from behind the departing clouds. "Your big brother is going to be so excited to meet you," Jackson whispered to Amelia. "He's been asking about you for months, wants to teach you to ride and rope and all the things I've been teaching him." He smiled. "Though knowing you, you'll probably be teaching him a thing or two before long." Amelia made a small sound, her miniature hand curling into a fist. "You've got your mama's determination already, I can tell. That's good. You're going to need it, growing up out here. The West isn't always kind, especially to women. But you'll have us, little one. Your mama and me, we'll make sure you know your own worth. We'll teach you to be strong and smart and brave." He thought about Sarah, about how she'd arrived at the ranch broken and desperate, and how she'd transformed into the woman she was now, confident, capable, beloved by everyone on the ranch. He thought about his own journey, from grief-stricken widower to husband and father again. "Life is strange, Amelia," he continued softly. "Sometimes it takes everything from you. And sometimes, when you least expect it, it gives you more than you ever dreamed possible." He looked at his sleeping wife. "Your mama saved me, you know. I was so lost after Amelia. The first Amelia died. I thought my life was over. But then your mama showed up in that trading post, trying to trade her mother's locket for food. And something in me woke up." Jackson stood carefully and carried the baby to the window. "This is all yours, little one. The Triple C. Someday you and Jamie will run it together. You'll face hardships, droughts, and storms and difficult choices. But you'll face them together, the way your mama and I have. That's the real secret, you see. Not facing things alone." Behind him, Sarah stirred. "Jackson, everything all right?" He turned to see her watching him with soft eyes. "Everything's perfect. Just having a chat with our daughter." "What are you telling her?" "About how lucky we are, all of us." He carried Amelia to the bed and settled beside Sarah, the baby between them. About how love is worth fighting for, even when you're scared. Sarah reached across their daughter to take Jackson's hand. I was so afraid when you carried me in here. I kept thinking about your first wife, about how she died, and I was terrified. Don't, Jackson said gently. You're here. You're both here. That's all that matters. They lay there together, watching their daughter sleep, until Jackson noticed Sarah's eyes drifting closed. Rest, sweetheart. I'll watch her. You need to sleep too, Sarah mumbled. I will, but right now, I just want to look at you both. Want to remember this moment. Sarah smiled, already halfway to sleep. I love you, Jackson Callahan. I love you too, Sarah Callahan. More than you'll ever know. 6 months later, in the first frost of autumn, tragedy struck the neighboring ranch. The Hendersons, a young couple who'd only settled in the territory a year ago, lost everything when their barn caught fire. The husband had managed to save the horses, but the barn and all their winter feed were gone. Sarah heard the news from Tom and immediately began organizing. By noon, she had the ranch hands loading wagons with hay, grain, and supplies. Jackson came in from the north pasture to find his wife directing operations like a general. What's all this? He asked, though he could guess. The Hendersons need help. We have extra hay from the good summer we had. It's the right thing to do. Jackson felt a surge of pride. This was who Sarah was. Generous, compassionate, always thinking of others. You're right. Take whatever they need, and tell the men I'll pay them extra for helping with the delivery. Sarah stood on her toes to kiss his cheek. Thank you. Don't thank me. This was your idea. He caught her waist, pulling her close. You've got a good heart, Mrs. Callahan. Must be where our children get it from, Sarah teased. They rode out together that afternoon, leaving Jamie with Rosa and bringing Amelia bundled against Sarah's chest. The Henderson ranch was in worse shape than they'd expected. The couple, barely older than Sarah herself, stood amid the ruins looking shell-shocked. Mrs. Henderson burst into tears when she saw the loaded wagons. We can't possibly repay you. No need, Jackson said firmly. We help each other out here. That's how we survive. Over the next week, Jackson organized a barn raising. Ranchers from all over the territory came to help, bringing materials and labor. Even men who'd been on opposite sides of the Hendricks dispute worked alongside each other, united by the unspoken code of the West. Neighbors helped neighbors, no matter what. Sarah, then Rosa, cooked for the workers, producing vast quantities of food. Jamie ran underfoot, trying to help, and mostly getting in the way, but no one minded. Amelia was passed from woman to woman, cooed over and cuddled. By week's end, the Hendersons had a new barn, fully stocked with feed, and a pen full of chickens donated by various families. Mr. Henderson stood before the assembled crowd, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you all. When we lost the barn, I thought we were finished. Thought we have to give up and go back east. He looked at Jackson and Sarah. But you showed us what community really means. We won't forget this. That night, as Sarah nursed Amelia before bed, Jackson sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. You know what you did this week? He asked quietly. We did it together. The whole community did. But you started it. You saw a need and acted. That's leadership, Sarah. He kissed the top of her head. You're changing this place, making it better. Sarah looked up at him. This place made me better first. When I came here, I was nobody. Just a desperate girl with nothing to offer. You were never nobody, Jackson said fiercely. You were always remarkable. I just got lucky enough to see it first." Sarah leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, listening to the soft sounds of their daughter nursing. Through the window, she could see lights from the bunkhouse, hear the distant lowing of cattle settling for the night. "Do you ever think about what your life would be like if I hadn't come here?" she asked. Jackson was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, and it terrifies me." He tightened his arm around her. "I'd probably still be going through the motions, working myself to exhaustion to avoid feeling anything. Tom would be running the place because I'd be too numb to care, and I'd be alone." He turned her face to his. "You saved me, Sarah. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Sarah corrected. "That's what love does. It rescues us from ourselves." Amelia had fallen asleep, milk-drunk and content. Sarah carefully transferred her to the cradle beside the bed, then turned back to Jackson. He pulled her into his lap, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I know I don't say it enough," he murmured, "but I thank God for you every single day, for the chance to love again, for this family we've built." Sarah cupped his face in her hands. "Then let me remind you of something. You're the best man I've ever known, Jackson Callahan. Strong and gentle, fierce and kind. You make me feel safe enough to be brave." Jackson kissed her deeply, pouring everything he felt into it: gratitude, desire, devotion. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah smiled. "Our children are asleep," she said meaningfully. Jackson's eyes darkened. "Are they now?" "They are." He stood, lifting her with him, and carried her to their bed. They made love slowly, reverently, celebrating the life they'd built together and the love that grew stronger with each passing day. Later, wrapped in Jackson's arms, with moonlight streaming through the window, Sarah thought about the girl she'd been, frightened, alone, convinced her life was over. She thought about the moment Jackson had appeared in that trading post, refusing her locket, offering her a future instead. "Jackson?" she whispered into the darkness. "Hmm? Do you remember what you said to me that first day, in the trading post?" Jackson's arms tightened around her. "I said a lot of things. You said silver wasn't what you needed, that I could keep the locket. Of course, that locket was precious to you. I wasn't going to let you trade your mother's memory for food. But do you know why that moment changed everything for me?" Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "It was the first time in my life that someone looked at me and saw a person, not a problem. You didn't see a desperate girl to take advantage of. You saw someone worth helping. Someone worth everything," Jackson finished. "Because that's what you are, Sarah. Then and now, worth everything." Sarah kissed him softly. "I love you so much, it scares me sometimes." "Good," Jackson said with a slight smile, "because that's exactly how much I love you. The kind of love that's a little bit terrifying, because you can't imagine life without it." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, hearts beating in sync. Outside, the ranch slept under a canopy of stars. Cattle moved slowly in their pastures. Horses dozed in their stalls. Guards made their rounds, keeping watch over all of it. The Triple C Ranch had weathered many storms and would weather many more. But at its heart, in the master bedroom of the big house, two people who'd found each other in the darkness slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together. The following spring brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah was in the garden with Jamie, teaching him to plant seeds, when a fancy carriage rolled up the drive. It was so out of place, with its polished black paint and city-slick horses, that Sarah immediately felt uneasy. A woman emerged, dressed in expensive traveling clothes, her dark hair elaborately styled. She was beautiful, in a cold, refined way that made Sarah acutely aware of her own sun-bronzed skin and simple dress. "Is this the Callahan Ranch?" the woman asked, her voice cultured and Eastern. "It is," Sarah replied, standing and brushing dirt from her hands. "Can I help you?" The woman's gaze swept over Sarah with obvious disdain. "I'm looking for Jackson Callahan. Is he available?" Before Sarah could respond, Jackson emerged from the barn, stopping short when he saw the carriage. His face went carefully blank, which told Sarah everything. He knew this woman. "Vivian," Jackson said flatly, "what are you doing here?" The woman, Vivian, smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Is that any way to greet your sister-in-law?" Sister-in-law. Sarah's stomach dropped. This was Amelia's sister. Jackson's jaw tightened. "Former sister-in-law. What do you want?" Vivian's gaze flickered to Sarah, then to Jamie, who'd hidden behind his mother's skirts. "May we speak privately? Anything you have to say, you can say in front of my wife." "Your wife?" Vivian's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "How convenient. Amelia's barely been gone 3 years, and you've already replaced her." Sarah flinched, but Jackson moved to her side immediately, his hand finding hers. "Watch yourself, Vivian. Sarah is my wife and the mother of my children. You will show her respect, or you can leave." "Children?" Vivian's voice sharpened. "Plural? Our daughter is 6 months old. Now what do you want?" Vivian's composure cracked slightly. "I came because I heard you'd remarried. I needed to see for myself." She looked at Sarah with barely concealed hostility. "My sister died giving you a son you hardly let her see while she was alive, and now you've moved some ranch girl into her house?" "That's enough," Jackson said, his voice dangerous. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't I? I know you worked Amelia into an early grave. I know she begged you to take her back east, to somewhere with decent doctors, and you refused because of this God-forsaken ranch." Sarah felt Jackson's hand tremble in hers. She squeezed it, trying to offer support, but Vivian's words had clearly struck a nerve. "Amelia loved this ranch," Jackson said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. "She knew what our life was when she married me. She was 18 years old and in love. She didn't know what she was agreeing to." Vivian took a step closer. "And now you've trapped another girl here. How long before you work her to death too?" "That's not fair," Sarah said quietly, finding her voice. "Jackson didn't trap me. He saved me." Vivian turned her cold gaze on Sarah. "Is that what you tell yourself? That you're here by choice, and not because you had nowhere else to go?" She laughed, a brittle sound. "My sister used to tell herself the same thing. Used to write me letters about how happy she was, how beautiful the land was. But I could read between the lines. She was lonely, isolated, dying by inches out here." "Vivian." Jackson's voice was low, controlled, but Sarah could hear the pain beneath it. "I loved Amelia. I did everything I could. Everything except take her somewhere she might have lived." The words hung in the air, like a death sentence. Jackson's face had gone white, and Sarah saw something break behind his eyes, saw the guilt he'd been carrying resurface with devastating force. "Get off my land," Jackson said finally. "Now." "Gladly. I've seen enough." Vivian climbed back into her carriage, but paused before closing the door. "I hope you're prepared for the same fate, Mrs. Callahan, because this ranch takes everything eventually." The carriage rolled away, leaving silence in its wake. Jamie was crying, upset by the angry voices. Sarah picked him up, holding him close, but her eyes were on Jackson. He stood frozen, staring at the spot where Vivian's carriage had been, his fists clenched at his sides. "Jackson," Sarah said softly. "I need—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I need to check on the cattle." "Jackson, wait." But he was already walking away. His stride, quick and purposeful. A man running from demons Sarah couldn't see. Sarah's heart broke for him. She took Jamie inside, got him settled with Rosa, checked on Amelia, who was napping peacefully, then set out to find her husband. She found him an hour later at the creek, their creek, where they'd shared so many quiet moments. He was sitting on the bank, head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sarah had never seen Jackson cry before. Not when Amelia was born, not during any of the hardships they'd faced. Seeing him break now was almost unbearable. She sat beside him, not speaking, just pressing close and wrapping her arms around him. Jackson turned into her embrace, burying his face in her shoulder, and finally let the grief pour out. Grief for Amelia, guilt over her death, fear that history would repeat itself. "She's right," he gasped between sobs. "Vivian's right. I killed Amelia. I should have taken her east when she got sick. Should have found better doctors. But I was so sure she'd get better, so convinced that if we just waited—" "Jackson, stop," Sarah said firmly. She pulled back to look at him, cupping his face in her hands. "Listen to me. You didn't kill Amelia. Fever did. Bad luck did. The cruelty of fate did, but not you. But if I'd taken her, then maybe she would have died in a strange city, far from home, without you beside her." Sarah's voice was gentle but insistent. "Or maybe the journey would have killed her faster. Or maybe, and this is important, Jackson, maybe nothing would have changed. Maybe her time was just up, and there was nothing anyone could do." "I can't know that," Jackson whispered. "I'll never know." "No, you won't. And that uncertainty is going to haunt you. But you can't let Vivian's grief and anger become your truth." Sarah wiped the tears from his face. "She's lashing out because she's hurting. She lost her sister, and she needs someone to blame. But Jackson, you loved Amelia. You gave her a good life here. That's what matters." "What if I lose you too?" Jackson's voice broke. "What if something happens and I can't save you? Sarah, I couldn't survive that. Not again." "Hey, look at me." Sarah waited until his red-rimmed eyes met hers. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm strong, I'm healthy, and I'm careful. But Jackson, even if something did happen, which it won't, you would survive. Because you have Jamie and Amelia who need you. Because you have this ranch that depends on you. Because you're the strongest man I've ever known." "I don't feel strong," Jackson admitted. "I feel terrified every single day. Terrified something will take you from me." "Then we're terrified together," Sarah said. "Because I feel the same way about you. Every time you ride out, I worry. Every time there's trouble, I'm afraid. But I can't let that fear stop me from living, from loving you. And neither can you." Jackson pulled her close, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "What did I do to deserve you? You offered me hope when I had none. You saw me when I felt invisible. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable." Sarah kissed his temple. "We deserve each other, Jackson. The good and the scary and everything in between." They sat by the creek until the sun began to set, holding each other, healing in the way that only comes from shared vulnerability. When they finally rose to head back to the house, Jackson took Sarah's hand. "I'm sorry you had to see me like that," he said quietly. "Don't be. That's what marriage is. Being there for each other in the hard moments, not just the easy ones." Jackson stopped, turning to face her. The setting sun painted him in gold, highlighting the planes of his face, the silver just beginning to thread his dark hair. I love you, Sarah Callahan, more than I thought possible, more than I knew how to love before you. I love you too, Sarah replied. Now and always. They walked back to the ranch together, hand in hand, leaving the ghosts of the past behind at the creek. Whatever tomorrow brought, joy or sorrow, triumph or hardship, they would face it the way they faced everything, together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Sarah and Jackson's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.